Chapter 4 of Tractate, Bava, Metzia continues going through the various laws of ownership and acquisitions. The first Mishnah says, there's a principle that giving the money for a purchase is not what creates the acquisition, rather it's only the actual taking of the item. So when two types of currency are exchanged, one currency will act as the purchasing money and the other acts as the acquired item. And the latter coins are the only ones which create the acquisition. So it said if somebody's purchasing gold coins with silver coins, the silver coins are considered to be money and the gold is considered to be the acquired item. If somebody purchases silver coins with copper, the silver coins still act as the money and the copper coins act as the acquisition. If flawed coins are exchanged for unflawed coins, the unflawed coins act as the money and the flawed coins create the acquisition. If minted coins are exchanged for unminted coins, the minted coins act as the money and the unminted coins create the acquisition. If coins are being exchanged for a movable property, the coins act as money and the property creates the acquisition. Broadly, if movable property is being exchanged for a movable property, the legal acquisition takes place when either party actually takes the item, meaning the sale can be reneged on up until that point. However, it does say if somebody uses this to try to get out of paying for things by illegally seizing property, then their punishment will come from heaven. Others say the advantage regarding the ability to renege on a sale goes to the person with the actual payment money at the time. The Gemara says, our Mishnah says that by a sale of gold for silver, the gold is the acquired item. Others had said the exact opposite, that the silver was the acquired item, as gold is more valuable, so perhaps it should be the currency. Then it was said that the gold should be the acquired item, as silver was a more readily accepted form of currency. It tries to bring proofs in accordance with both opinions, citing many various cases and debates in regard to different coin usage by tithes and redemptions and purchases and similar. One of such is a lengthy argument as to if it's permitted to take mais or sheni tithed fruits and deconsecrate them onto gold coins or copper coins. Others say this debate actually applies to deconsecrating silver, mais, or sheni tithed salatin coins onto gold coins. It does mention that the actual city of Jerusalem had more lenient laws of deconsecration within it. It does conclude that it's agreed between opinions that first money can be deconsecrated onto second coins, even outside of Jerusalem, but there are still unresolved difficulties with the wording. Now, some actually disagree with the principal point and say that coins actually cannot be used to acquire items. Those that say that this is forbidden is as the value of a coin is typically on the image or face of the coin, meaning the government backing of the currency essentially, which is subject to change. It debates this point from a number of different cases. Based on these opinions, it additionally debates whether a coin itself can be acquired through an acquisition. It is held that if a coin cannot be acquired through an acquisition, then it also can't acquire items. It further debates which is the case from additional locations. This point as to whether coins, currency, essentially can themselves be used to acquire or as an acquisition is argued on further from various cases. This is debated further. It also brings the concept of kinyan sodar, acquisition of an item via handing over a handkerchief, and it's an argument as to whose handkerchief should be used. This is argued from various points on property acquisition. Acquisitions can be created via utensils, even if they're less than the minimum value of a purata coin. It's a debate if an acquisition can be done with produce based on a few conversations. Back towards the initial Mishnah, it gives a definition of unminted coins. It had stated that it's the giving of the merchandise that completes the sale, not the paying of the money. It's a debate if this is a biblical or rabbinic enactment. The logic of an enactment is so that people have an incentive to protect property that they're selling after it's sold, but before it's been actually given to the purchaser. Others say it's a biblical principle and it's based on a verse. It further explains this debate. It argues sources to try to prove either opinion as to if it's a biblical or a rabbinic enactment from various scriptural quotes and similar. It was stated in the Mishnah, if somebody reneged on a sale after being paid, he receives punishment from heaven. Now, some say the court just informs the man that heaven will punish him. Others say that the court actually curses him. It debates this from a number of sources. There's a related debate as to if a collateral affects the potential payment of an entire loan or only the value of the collateral, which is based on a broader argument on this topic. It quotes some particular incidents, and it discusses how and when reneging on verbal agreements creates a lack of trustworthiness based on a number of particular cases involving people reneging on their deals. It additionally qualifies the latter opinion that whoever has the money has the authority to renege on the deal. New Mishnah, now discussing the concept of overcharging and price fraud. Broadly, it's considered overcharging and thereby forbidden as price fraud if the amount is a sixth greater than the actual purchase. The purchaser can demand reimbursements for the overcharge for the amount of time it would take to assess the value of the item with a merchant or his relative. Others ruled that overcharging was by a third, which the merchants were pretty happy about, but he also ruled that the purchasers had all day to retract the sale, which then upset them, so they followed the former opinion. The Gemara says, it's a debate if this impermissible overcharge of a sixth is a sixth of the actual value of the item or a sixth of what the man is paying for the item. This is argued from a few sources. It's additionally debated. It also clarifies the different opinions of time frames and essentially holds that if the overcharge is under a sixth, the sale is valid with no refunds. And if it's exactly a sixth, it's a valid sale, but the seller must return the excess charge as long as it's within the proper time frame, which is a point that also applies if it's greater than a sixth, which we said was time to assess the value from a merchant or relative. It brings sources. Additionally, regarding this limited time frame of retracting a sale, some say it applies to a buyer, however the seller can retract whenever he wants to. It brings a few particular cases of sellers overcharging, there being a refund requested, and the resulting situation based on the particular time frames. New Mishnah. Both the buyer and seller are subject to not commit price fraud, as it does for ordinary people and merchants. Others say that there's just no price fraud for merchants. If somebody committed price fraud, overcharging, essentially the buyer, the other man, has the upper hand, meaning he can demand his money back or the excess overcharged amount. The Gemara cites scriptural quotes for this concept. The opinion which holds merchants are allowed to commit price fraud, meaning under or overcharging, is as they should be allowed to undercharge if they want while selling an item to get money and make a more pressing sale, for instance. It clarifies sources for the remaining points of the Mishnah and debates if it's permitted to stipulate within a sale that they're going to ignore the guidelines of price fraud and charge far beyond or beneath its set value. These principles are discussed further. New Mishnah. Coins erode over time, and as they did, they would decrease in value. It's considered to be fraud if a coin is given and it's been reduced past a 24th its value. Others say if it's been reduced past a 12th its value, others say a 6th. The receiver can demand repayment within a time frame in cities, within the time it would take to show it to a money changer, and in villages until the next Shabbos. If the giver of the coin recognizes it, he can take it back no matter how much time has passed. It can be used to deconsecrate Ma'is or Sheni tithe coins, as it's really only super particular people who would refuse to accept such a coin. The Gemara quotes a different source, which essentially says the same, but reversed, that anything less than the set amount of coin erosion just can't be used. According to the opinions that say you can use coins which have eroded in values less than a sixth, this would be different than typical sale items, which we had just said can't be sold outside of a range of a sixth, as people would be more particular about coins which won't circulate if they're undervalued. It also gives the measurements for how much a coin can erode before it must be disposed of, out of concern it could be used to cheat somebody, which are individually qualified. Some say such an eroded coin should be used as a pendant with a hole in the middle so it won't be found and misused, or otherwise just destroyed completely. The time frame of returning an eroded coin was split between cities and villages. By overcharging other items, non-coins, as discussed earlier, some say the time frame applies specifically within large cities, others say it just applies everywhere, as everyone everywhere can tell the value of something like a coat, but only within cities are there professional money changers who can accurately assess the value of an eroded coin. As was stated in the Mishnah, the coin can be returned whenever if the giver wants, although it's not necessary. It also qualifies the principles of deconsecrating tithe coins, which are then discussed further. There are further points on laws of tithe discussed, of Ma'is or Sheni, and reimbursement of an additional fifth after redeeming consecrated things. These principles are clarified further. It additionally mentions a principle from Tractate, Bava, that if a thief stole an item and denied doing so, taking a false oath, and then admits that he had, he pays an additional fifth. It explains how this principle also applies by teruma and Ma'aser tithes, and consecrated property, along with a few various sources. If something has a derivative of consecration sanctity, some say the additional fifth value that's paid when redeeming does not apply, and it brings sources for this point. New Mishnah. It was said that price fraud was created by a charge outside the range of a sixth. It's also said that regarding people taking oaths in court that they don't owe part of a debt, the minimum of this is for silver mois. This requirement for taking an oath is only if he admits to part of the debt, the minimum of admission of which would be for a pruta coin. It also mentions a bunch of laws that have the minimum value of involvement to be a pruta coin. There's this case we just said, where the minimum admission to obligate somebody to take an oath is that of a case involving a pruta coin. A woman can be betrothed through a pruta minimum. There's liability for benefiting from consecrated property called me'ila, from property worth a minimum of a pruta. Somebody who finds lost property worth a pruta must try to return it, and somebody steals a minimum of a pruta and then takes a false oath denying this. When he eventually returns it, he must travel to wherever the man is to return it. The Gemara says it repeated the point about price fraud as an introduction to these new points. Based on the fact that it's excluded from the list, it's actually a debate if the laws of price fraud apply if the sum is counted in prutas. Now, our list had those specific mentioned 5 times that the legal minimum value of a situation is that of a pruta coin. Others had a slightly different list, the first being the unmentioned price fraud, the second being to take an oath, the third for betrothal, the fourth for theft, and the fifth is that a session of court is held for claims worth a pruta. Our source didn't teach this last one, as it was dealing with laws of theft, teaching how far somebody needs to travel to return an item, as mentioned, and also returning the lost item, teaching that there's an obligation to return it even if it drops in value under a pruta. This second opinion has his list to teach laws of theft, and it also mentioned the last point in court to show this opinion, as others do disagree with the point. It further qualifies the choices of instances given in these lists. New Mishnah. There are 5 instances where somebody is obligated to pay a principal and also an additional fifth. A Kohen who accidentally eats teruma tithes of various particular listed sorts, somebody who redeems his 4th year fruits or mais or sheni tithes needs to add an excess fifth, somebody who redeems his own consecrated item, somebody who uses a minimum purota value of consecrated items, and if somebody steals a purota minimum from somebody and then swears falsely that he hadn't, he would need to pay the principal and an excess fifth. The Gemara additionally qualifies all these individual cases. It argues further points on whether the particular concerns of separating tithes from bakers apply, for instance, in certain unique scenarios. New Mishnah. Some things are not subject to laws of price fraud. Slaves, notes of indebtedness, land, and temple property. Penalties of double, times 4, or times 5 payments would not apply by these. An unpaid guardian of property does not need to take oaths that he wasn't negligent if the property he was watching got damaged, and a paid guardian would be liable if he was negligent and otherwise would not need to pay. If somebody is responsible for consecrated property, he would be subject to the laws of price fraud. Some say the sale of a Torah scroll, an animal, or a jewel are not subject to price fraud. Others disagree. The Gemara cites scriptural sources for these points. These are discussed. It's asked as to whether or not renting movable objects is subject to price fraud, as to whether sales and rentals are comparable. Some seem to say a rental is viewed as a sort of a temporary sale. It's also asked if somebody planted wheat seeds and then right after sold them. There's a debate if there's applicability of price fraud. Some say yes, as the seeds are viewed as if they're in a container. Some say no, as they're considered to be land, which is not subject to price fraud. There's a debate this at length, and additionally, what it's considered to be by various other laws of various types of tithes or offerings in regards to just planted seeds, which go unresolved. These further principles are additionally qualified. It also discusses particular unique laws that applied within the temple treasury regarding these laws. Scriptural sources are brought for the various points from the Mishnah. The principles of individual responsibilities and types of guardians are additionally described. There was also that latter opinion which said that there's no price fraud for Torah scrolls, which is explained to be as it doesn't have a value limit, and jewels or animals, some say there's no price fraud as people would purchase them outside their actual price range to match a set of a sort of what they already had, as they're considered to be important. Based on this, there would also be other exceptions to the application of price fraud by a horse, a sword, or shield during a war, which wouldn't have price fraud as they're necessary for military reasons to protect people's lives. New Mishnah. The same way you shouldn't be dishonest with buying and selling, you should not be dishonest with your words. For instance, you shouldn't ask the price of an item if you don't plan to buy it. If somebody had repented, you shouldn't go and remind them of their past misdeeds. If somebody was descended from converts, you shouldn't remind them of that either. The Gemara brings sources for these points from Scripture and gives various instances of things you shouldn't say, whether because they're dishonest or as they'll offend the person you're speaking to. Very, very broadly, you should be very careful with your words to never say things that are dishonest or things that will embarrass people. In fact, some say verbally harming somebody is even worse than monetarily wronging a person, as verbal words harm the person himself as opposed to his finances, and also restitution is not possible. It speaks on how improper it is to embarrass others. Some say there's an exceptionally long punishment in Gehenna for those who commit adultery, somebody who publicly embarrasses their friend, and somebody who calls their friend an embarrassing nickname. It gives further instances as to how improper it is to embarrass one's fellow, and quotes many verses and teachings describing this. It also says one should be very careful to not upset their wife. Related, it said that since the destruction of the temple, the gates of prayer were closed, but the gates of tears were left open to us. It's also said it's better to not listen to one's wife by religious matters, but one should listen to one's wife by worldly matters, according to one opinion. It quotes many similar teachings on these points. There's a famous story quoted regarding the topic as to not offending people. Essentially, there was a debate between the sages and Rabbi Eliezer as to whether a certain type of oven, which in this case was cut up and refused together with sand, whether it was subject to the laws of impurity or not. Rabbi Eliezer said that it was considered to be pure. The sages vehemently disagreed, and they argued with him at length. Rabbi Eliezer argued his point and eventually declared that if he was right, the nearby carob tree should prove it. The carob tree then uprooted itself and moved away a long distance. The sages responded by saying, "You can't bring a proof from a carob tree." So Rabbi Eliezer said, if he's right, the water in the nearby canal should prove it. The water then flowed backwards. The sages again responded, "You can't bring proofs from a canal." So Rabbi Eliezer said, if he's right, the walls of the study hall should prove it. So the walls started to collapse until the sage Rabbi Yeshua rebuked the walls, asking why they're getting involved. So out of respect for both of them, they just stayed slightly leaning. Finally, Rabbi Eliezer said, if he's right, heaven should prove it. So a voice declared from heaven that the law accords with Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Yeshua responded saying, the Torah is not in heaven, meaning it was given from heaven to people who then have to apply the laws to the best of their understanding. So essentially he said heaven spoke as a test of a sort, and it says that much later a different sage spoke to the prophet Elijah, who said that God was pleased with this statement. Anyways, as Rabbi Eliezer refused to concede the point to the sages, they eventually excommunicated him. So Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Eliezer's student, was sent to inform him of this, saying it had to be him, as if Rabbi Eliezer was informed improperly, the world could be destroyed. So Rabbi Akiva wore black and sat at a distance from Rabbi Eliezer and implied the excommunication through his words. So Rabbi Eliezer tore his garments and sat on the floor and cried, and a third of the olives, wheat, and barley in the world spoiled. Rabbi Eliezer was so upset then that anything he looked at got incinerated, and the sage Rabbi Gamliel, the Nasi who had excommunicated him, his boat nearly sunk. Rabbi Eliezer was actually married to Rabbi Gamliel's sister, and eventually Rabbi Eliezer prayed the Tachanun prayer, much to her chagrin, and Rabbi Gamliel passed away. It also quotes verses explaining the wrongdoing of being unkind to a convert. New Mishnah. Further forbidden deceptive practices in sales. Produce from different fields cannot be mixed even if both are new. Obviously, new produce can't be mixed with old produce. Strong wine is allowed to be mixed with mild wine, as it only improves it. Sellers cannot mix sediment into wine, but they can put in the sediment, which is going to be explained soon. If somebody mixed water with wine, it can't be sold unless the customers are informed that it's diluted. It can't be sold to a merchant in case he decides to use it to cheat his own customers. If the regional custom is to dilute wine, it can be sold. It's permissible to combine grain from different threshing floors into one silo. Wine from different presses can be put in one cask as long as they're not intended to mix. The Gemara explains why old and new grain can't be mixed. It also ruled that strong and mild wine can be mixed, at least during the wine production season when people are aware that this is done. The point on mixing sediment is explained. Old sediments cannot be mixed with new wine, or new sediment with old wine, but wine can be mixed with its own sediment. The remaining points are qualified. New Mishnah. It's a debate if it's permissible to give roast grain or nuts, treats essentially, to children to encourage them to shop at your store. It's a debate if you're permitted to lower your prices below the market price. It's a debate if it's permitted to sift crushed beans to remove refuse to make it look better, essentially, in the shop. Some say no, others say you can, but they would say that you just can't sort only the top layer, leaving the bottom layer unsifted. A seller is not allowed to beautify and dress up something he's selling, be it a slave, an animal, or a utensil. The Gemara explains, some allow giving treats to kids shopping at your store, as technically everybody could just do that. It additionally explains how dressing up items isn't allowed, giving instances, no standing up animals' hairs to make them look more healthy. It gives some instances of things that are permitted, adding fringes to coats, adjusting garments in certain manners, painting baskets, etc., things involving new merchandise. It gives an instance of how it's forbidden to beautify slaves, once somebody dyed his slave's hair to make him look younger and it washed out and it was said to be improper. And that's the end of chapter 4.